Evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. We are so grateful that you have decided to spend your Wednesday evening with us. My name is Dentricia, and I'm the advocacy consultant for Lake Health and Wellbeing. And we're going to be unpacking and delving into an incredible conversation here this evening. Can the law really combat non-communicable diseases? And we have experts in the field, and we're also in collaboration and in partnership with the St. Kitts Nevis Bar Association. So we're in good company here for this discussion. Just by way of the flow of the conversation, we will have remarks from the president of the St. Kitts and Nevis Bar Association, followed by just a brief presentation on the use of the law to tackle NCDs in Mexico from our colleague and friend Javier. And then we're going to move into a panel discussion, really tackling the topic. And you are free throughout the presentations to give us your feedback, to share your questions, utilizing the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And as best as we can, we're going to elevate those questions and answer them and direct them to the panel and to the experts. But we want to get a sense of who we have with us here this evening. I would have shared that we have persons and reps from the St. Kitts Nevis Bar Association. We have the doctors, the lawyers, we have nurses. And so let us know, where you are joining us from, if you're in St. Kitts, if you're in Nevis, if you're joining us from Antigua, Grenada, what the country may be. Utilize that Q&A box to let us know so that we can give you a warm welcome before we delve into our conversation here this evening. Alrighty, so I see that we have no activity in the chat, but we are going to encourage you throughout the evening to utilize the Q&A box to communicate with us, to ask us your questions, and to give us your feedback. I am going to just have the president of the St. Kitts Nevis Bar Association, Miss Carolyn Merchant, share a few remarks. We would have had previously a session exploring this topic already. Great feedback, and we are so happy to have a second part to the conversation. And Carolyn, in addition to being the president of the Bar Association here on the Federation, she is an astute attorney, and she is admitted to practice here in the Federation, the BVI, the British Virgin Islands, Anguilla circuits of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. And she's a notary public in St. Kitts and Nevis. And she prides herself in consistently helping her clients get the best results and outcomes as possible, no matter the cases. But on a lighter side, she is a friend of our NGO, and we are happy once again to always have her support and her expertise. And so, Carolyn, I'm just going to turn over the mic to you for you to share a little welcome and remarks to those who are here with us this evening.
Thank you, Dentricia. Good evening to everyone. The St. Kitts Nevis Bar Association has as two of its main focus areas for 2022, continued legal education as well as public education initiatives. This discussion this evening is the perfect merger between the continued development of us as legal practitioners while engaging on matters of broader public interest and concern. When one thinks of non-communicable diseases, the instant thinking is often just related to health matters. However, the rule of law can play a critical role in the response to non-communicable diseases through the use of legislation and policy. According to the World Health Organization, laws can help to address risk factors for non-communicable diseases through banning unhealthy habits such as smoking in public places, discouraging unhealthy behaviors, encouraging healthier behaviors, and by requiring healthy behaviors, such as mandating minimum daily physical activity requirements for school students. Law and policy can therefore significantly assist in the promotion of healthy diets, physical activities, and other initiatives to reduce the prevalence of NDCs. The St. Kitts Nevis Bar Association is therefore pleased to partner with Lake Health and Wellness to host this timely webinar on can the law really combat non-communicable diseases. As Dentricia would have mentioned, this session is the second of what we hope to be many similar sessions on public health law related matters. The session this evening comes with a high caliber of presenters and individuals well-versed in this area. We therefore anticipate a very lively and meaningful discussion. We trust that the discussion and conversation had here today would lead the charge to a serious discussion at a much higher level within St. Kitts and Nevis as well as the region on how the law can and perhaps should be used to combat NDCs. I therefore wish the presenters well. I think that we should have a very lively discussion this evening, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the presenters as well as from you, the audience, on the feedback on this very timely topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carlin, for that. We are, again, always so happy to have your support. And just to reiterate what you would have shared, we are looking forward to having a lively discussion. Now, I see in the chat that we have persons joining us from throughout the Caribbean. So we have nurses, students, doctors, members of the general public from St. Kitts and Nevis. And we're also happy to have persons from Grenada. We also have persons from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And so we have a full regional house here this evening. And it's really indicative of just the importance of sharing and educating our communities about how we can tackle and address NCDs that have taken over our communities. Now, when we think about how we can do that, we really have to look at where has the work been done previously, what have the results been, and what are some takeaways and learnings that we can implement and customize for our individual islands and nations. And I'm happy to have Javier from Mexico share with us a little bit about the use of the law to tackle NCDs. Javier has done extensive work. He is a Mexican lawyer. And his work focuses on the right to health, food law, human rights. He is experienced in international law, public health law, human rights, and strategic litigation. And he was involved, and this is really to bring context to his expertise, he was involved in the implementation of sugar taxes in Mexico, front of packaging labeling, and tobacco control policies. So Javier will walk us through what that was like, what the feedback was like, and some takeaways. And I want you guys to take notes. And if you have questions for Javier, we're happy to elevate your questions. So help me make welcome to Javier. We're so happy to have you and looking forward to your insights.
Thank you so much. So I will be sharing a presentation. Just let me know if you can see it. It should be already shared. And apologies for my English in advance for any mistakes. So let me just introduce the NGO where I work, El Poder del Consumidor. We are an NGO that works on consumer rights, healthy food, and food issues, especially related to ultra-processed food, and try to improve healthy diets. As you were stating, we have been working on these topics for several years, and I'm really glad that we can share our experiences, especially in two main policies that from a point of view, have tried to tackle NCDs, non-communicable diseases. The first one is the soda taxes, and several years after the label package. So I'm just gonna this overview of my presentation. At the beginning, I will try to talk about Mexican context, the evidence that we have, then talk about the taxes and the process of the taxes in Mexico with the legal outcomes, because I think it's really important to talk what is the outcome that we have, the courts, the cases that arrive to the Supreme Court, etc. And then we will talk about more about the labeling itself. But I would like to focus in this part in the public health outcomes. So hopefully you will have a good mixture of public health and law during the presentation. And so one of the things that we must say about Mexico is Mexico is one of the main consumers countries of sugar drinks, especially soda. When we regard the evidence, we can see it. Mexico was the second country with most people with obesity, but also one of the countries that has a highest consumption of sugar beverage throughout the world. In this regard, it was stated that 1 of 3 children will have a serious risk to develop diabetes throughout their lives. And Mexican population consumes 166 liters of soft drinks per year, per capita per year. So this is really strong evidence to identify the problem regarding to public health. What is the problem that what are the problems of that we are facing? Non-communicable diseases, and what does some other evidence that we have from the National Survey of Health and Nutrition is that almost 40% of the Mexican population has overweight and 35% has obesity. We're talking about millions of people, around 45 million people, and is linked obviously with some non-communicable diseases like hypertension, which has a link with the 35% of the population, and a prevalence of diabetes of the 10%. So we have high numbers of non-communicable diseases and a high consumption of sugar beverage. In this regard, we have to look up for the evidence in order to understand what is the source of the problem. We understand that this kind of diseases are multifactorial. However, we can find out structural changes that can lead us to a different future, talking about health and the future of Mexicans' health population. So what, in summary, what the evidence give us is a strong link between consumption of this beverage and the high risk of suffering non-communicable diseases or some of the risks like obesity and overweight. Therefore, in accordance to the international agencies and the academics, we understood that it was important to improve public policies that can tackle this issue. So the first one in Mexico we identified was the soda and sugar beverage tax. This the proposal was presented in 2013, and the way it worked, and it works until so far, it works until today, is that we have 1 peso, that's the Mexican currency right now, the peso, 1 peso per liter, and this in the case of beverage, and in the case of solid food, we will have that an 8%, a percentage of the 8% of the tax base in any product that has 2,075 calories or more per 100 grams. So this is the way the tax works in general. How do we arrive at that point? First, and it's really important to state that, especially as an NGO, as an advocate, is to create a conscious, a public awareness about the issue. What is the issue? Consumption of these products. What can we do with the taxes, for example? We could create some water fountains in the schools. So part of our campaign at that moment was at the beginning to create the awareness, for example, of what happens, how much sugar are you drinking, how much sugar are you consuming while you drink soda. The image on the right, sorry, it's in Spanish, but it will say like, would you give to your children like 12 spoons of sugar? So why do you give them soda? This is the main message that can create the conscious and rise this public health issue into public agenda, into public discussion. However, also as advocates, we have to face taxes are unpopular in general, so we have to create a sort of solution, we can say that way. What we are going to do with these taxes? Well, in the picture of the left, you can see a girl drinking from a water fountain in the schools, and what it says, like, with the SSB tax, we can create water fountains in public spaces and in schools. So you create an idea and a general opinion of what is the debate about and how we can overcome this issue. So the more general information about the tax in Mexico, we had it that the SSB tax came into force in January 2014. As it was expected, many companies tackle this public measure. The courts, they file writs against the taxes, and this is when we talk about the legal outcomes. Legal outcomes, as we see it, are the results, the rulings of these cases. What happened? What was created in the legal world after these companies filed their writs against the tax? So, just a general overview, it is important to say that most of the companies that were against these taxes were in, say, subsidiaries linked to big soda companies such as Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, or even some distributions like Walmart, like some stores. One of the disclaimers is that, yeah, some of the cases were ruled in favor of the enterprises, but just in these cases. Examples, the products that we can say won these cases were more like peanuts or almonds, are solid food with high calories, but not considered as processed or ultra-processed food. So good for the almonds, but bad for the sodas. And let me explain why. Because the court ruled against these enterprises and created at least two legal arguments that can be used, for example, in tobacco control or other products that has some harmful externalities to the population, and are the government tries to create a public policy to tackle them. First concept is the extra fiscal purpose, the extra tax purpose. So what the court stated was that some taxes, their purpose or the main purpose is not to give money to the government. Instead, they're trying to discourage the consumption of some products or some services that are harmful to population. In this case, soda and sugar beverage. Also, it reaffirmed the power and the faculties of the federal Congress to regulate this kind of conducts through taxes. So one of the things I would like to outline here is that throughout these cases that were addressing a particular issue that was the soda and sugar beverage, the creation of these legal concepts can be used and have been used in other kind of problems linked or related to NCDs. For example, tobacco, alcohol. The same argument can be framed in these other products. Like the extra fiscal purpose also is used in ecology and pollution cases that arise also to the Supreme Court. So other legal outcomes that we have at the moment was the reaffirmation, we can say that ways, of the questions that the plaintiffs arrived at that moment. Do you violate consumer rights? We have, do you violate access principles? It is compatible with the trade of freedom. It's proportional, the measure is proportional. So in general, the court says no to all of these arguments. I will not talk specifically about each of one, but it's important just to say that the court at the end ruled and stated that this kind of policies actually were in favor of consumers, for example, for the disadvantages that comes with those products. And whenever they're making this test of proportionality, court said it was necessary, idoneous, and it can how can I say this? It can arise to the point that the purpose can be completed. You know, the constitutional purpose, that is protecting health people. So this is the first part of the presentation regarding the access. Now we're gonna go to the we can say newest regulation that also tackles NCDs. That is the warning labels. Now we have in the ultra processed food and some processed food, food has excess in critical nutrients such as sodium, added sugars, fats, etc. In general, the way this labeling is regulated, we have some regulations in the general health law, and more specifically in the rule NOM 051, there is a technical rule that states technical standards in this case for all the labeling. So the NOM 051 state talks about many issues about labelings of the products, not only the wording labels, but also the declarations of the products, the ingredients, other kind of labelings, warnings, etc. So in general, the final outcome after this, after the amendment of the law and the process of the NOM 051, we have these 5 sealings, warning seals about excess of calories, of sodium, of fat trans, sugars, and fats in general. But also in comparison to Chile or Peru, we have 2 warning legends. The first one is uh, both of them are added in accordance to the high supreme interest of the child's. First one states that if any product has caffeine, should say it has caffeine, discouraged for children. And the other one is if you have sweeteners, is not beneficial for the children. So this is the general labeling in Mexico. It's important to say that in the moments of the discussion, we have to underline what was the public health goal. And this is truly important because we have a high supreme goal that is to eliminate all the NCDs, tackle NCDs in general, and to eliminate diabetes from our lives. However, it's important to short the public health goal. In this case, was to warn clearly and truthfully about the content of critical nutrients, salt, sugar, fats, and other ingredients that pose health risks in the excessive consumption. This will be important whenever you have a further case in the courts or any public health discussions, because that way your objective of public health will become or can become a tool in any legal battle. Also, we use the frame of human rights in order to support our proposal. I'm just putting here Olivier de Schutter, a former special rapporteur from Right to Food, and we use other arguments, for example, right to information for consumers, the right to health linked to information, the right to food. All these international and national legal frameworks also help us to support a technical rule that, in theory, when you discuss a technical administrative rule, human rights are a little bit more further or not compatible. However, when you state a public health goal, the consequence is to improve health population. This regard is compatible with purpose of, for example, the human right to health. Just to give you an example of the way we try to frame discussions in the throughout the process of the warning label. And I would like to also put a little video. This was also from a former special rapporteur, Anna Gruber, that once the labeling was entered into force, he sent a special message to Mexico for the labeling. So I'm just gonna put the first minutes of the video, and then I'm gonna continue with the presentation. Please let me know if you can listen to the video.
Hello, I'm Anand Grover, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health from 2008 to 2014. I'm here to talk about front of package warning labeling, or FOPLs as they're known, in Mexico. In the last 2 decades in Mexico, overall prevalence of overweight and obesity amongst adult men and women in urban and rural areas has gone up from 62% in 2000 to 75% in 2018. Not surprisingly, there has been corresponding increase in the prevalence of major non-communicable diseases, or NCDs as they are called, amongst adult men and women, nearly doubling during the same period. Diabetes from 5.8% to 10.3%, and hypertension from 12.5 to 18.4%.
Sorry, I wanted to move forward just a little bit.
These unhealthy foods and beverages are pushed by industry by spending billions of dollars and pesos in aggressive marketing and advertising. At international law, states have obligations. They have to proactively and comprehensively address the diet-related preventable risk factors for NCDs in line with the Right to Health framework. The obligation for the states is to protect the right to health by for NCDs in line with the Right to Health framework. The obligation for the states is to protect the right to health by regulating of the activities of the food and beverage industries to ensure that they convey accurate, easily understandable, transparent, and comprehensible information on their products. One such measure is the adoption of the front of package warning labeling, or FOPL as it is called, on unhealthy foods and beverages. Of all the different FOPL systems that are available, nutritional warnings to highlight products with high content of energy, sugar, saturated fat, and sodium has shown to be the most effective.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that because I think it's really important the way this ex-rapporteur stated. First, we identified the context and the issues of public health that are arising in our country, in this case in Mexico. Then he stated the international and national legal obligations of the state to tackle these issues as part of their obligations regarding the health population. And afterwards, he talks about a measure that can help the state to overcome these problems. So one of the things also that the rapporteur stated really quickly, it was the efforts of some industries for not applying or not trying to have this kind of warning labels. The industries are, in general, has an opposition, a strong opposition against these measures. And one of the things I would like to outline is that most of these debates are already solved, despite the fact that they are legal debates, are already solved by the evidence of public health. if we look for the evidence in the studies in the academia of public health, we can understand how, for example, the GDA, this labeling with percentages and globes is not as effective as the warning label. Other kind of arguments that the industry always raises are the trademark rights. Are the trademark rights are opposed or can be opposed to the regulations, for example, of advertisement, children advertisement in the labelings? Those are questions that are always arising in the legal debates regarding the labeling. So it's important always to ask ourselves, what is the public health goal again? What we are fighting for and tackling against? What is the evidence and what does the evidence says? And in this special case, what are the children's rights framework that you have that you can use in order to support your policy? Sorry. So finally, I would like to talk about some of the public health outcomes that we have seen after the implementation of the labeling. I think my time is almost over, but just really quick, I can share the presentation so you can have more detailed data. But in general, the first positive outcome that we have was that in comparison to the GDA, the warning label was more used by the population and it was more understood by them. And in how can I say? In addition, the warning label was used not only to change some food habits, but also discourage or not to consume products that had the warning label. And on the other hand, one of the highest benefits from the labeling is the reformulation the companies and the enterprises do of their products. So we have that huge enterprises such as Pefico, Coca-Cola, or some milk companies, huge milk companies in Mexico named Lala, or bread companies like Bimbo, change it the whole portfolio. For example, Bimbo, there is this huge enterprise throughout Latin America, changes the 82% of their bakery portfolio. This is a huge change in a practical way, we can say it, in our daily lives of consumption that is obviously linked to a public health measure. It is the warning labels. So this is the way, from a point of view, in which the law helps to change the environments and the consumption, and at the end tackles the NCDs problems, the NCDs approach. Well, finally, just the last slides. There are some cases that now has arrived to the Supreme Court. Most of them filed by Coca-Cola. Will be solved in the following weeks. So we can we'll have to make some advocacy in the court, but it happens just as the taxes. We hopefully have a good favorable resolution ruling from the court in order to protect the public health. So with this, I will conclude my presentation. Sorry for the 2-3 minutes that I took. But I'm open to any question. Thank you so much.
We want to thank Javier for that excellent breakdown and presentation on what was done in Mexico. Really great takeaways. I am happy to share mine, but I do want you to utilize the chat to let us know if you have any question for Javier. This is your opportunity. He would have spoken about just the direct messaging in the campaign leading up to the law being implemented, the legal filing complaints that took place and how that was navigated, the warning labels, and we saw the results not only through feedback to from the public, but also we saw huge organizations. We recognize Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Nestle. We recognize those within this region. They reformulated their products. So we've seen, you know, a bit. I'm interested to know, what were your takeaways? What questions do you have now that we have Javier in the hot seat, that you may have had after listening to that beautiful presentation? Excellent. So I do see a question here, Javier, from Maisha. Thank you so much. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name correctly. But she indicated, how did you go about expanding legal capacity to support the advocacy in Mexico? And I can repeat it. How did you go about expanding legal capacity to support advocacy in Mexico?
I'm so sorry. I don't think I'm getting the question. Sorry, maybe it's like how we are trying to expand our legal capacity in order
Right.
to. Okay. Oh, okay. So.
So
Oh, okay.
the capacity of lawyers to support the work, because we know that in the beginning there was that legal framework, then the complaints came in. Now there are, you know, more navigations to take place. So how did you go about that? You know, looping in lawyers to support the work.
Well, yeah, that's thank you for the question. Yeah, that's really that was really a challenge, you know, in general. As you may know, at least in Mexico, the way or the approaches of NCDs, public health and law, are far from being really close. Like, I don't know, like in schools or like our formation as lawyers, those topics are not really normalized yet. I think it's extremely important. So first thing that we have done is to create alliances with the public health institutes, the public health associations, and with other NGOs that works in related topics to us. For example, food sovereignty or healthy environments or other kind of topics that they have lawyers also, and we share our experience. Tobacco control is another good opportunity in which we share our experience. And in this regard, we start or try to talk a common ground language, legal language, we can say that way, you know. So it has been difficult. Also, we have been really strategic, you know, strategic in order to we don't have the resources of Coca-Cola. Obviously, we don't have the resources of these huge enterprises. So planning, being strategic, and try to form alliances, national alliances, as I was saying, but also international alliances. Juan is one witness of all the work we try to do in collaboration with other partners and people throughout Latin America and the region. Also with institutes in the global north, as the O'Neill Institute. So it's about more creating all these network can help us, because yeah, at the end it has been hard, but yeah, team group is the team play, I think, is the best solution always.
Thank you so much. So we see the importance of partnerships and collaborations through the advocacy work to get that extra legal support to help with the work. We do have another question, Javier. So the question comes from Curlin, president of the Bar Association here. And she asks, has there been any reduction in the number of NCDs or evidence of improvements in the overall health in Mexico since the introduction of the taxes and labeling requirements? So I know in your presentation, you would have mentioned that you got some feedback from the survey, but maybe if you can share maybe some statistics or maybe some examples of NCDs where you would have seen improvements in health in Mexico.
So in general, well, the labeling was was entering into force just 2 years ago. So in general, to see a change in the NCDs, we will need more time. And in this regard, the importance of the public health objective, it's is that when we state that, we can measure the policy. So if our aim is to change, to aware people, to warn people about critical nutrients. Our policy is effective at the moment that the people use this labeling to recognize critical nutrients. What we have seen, statistic is that, for example, just to say something, 2 months after the implementation in 2020, approval of the labeling on the parental group, people that were interviewed, it was that 78% of the population recognized these labelings and use these labelings for the consumption, just after 2 months of the implementation. Another statistic that I think it's important to state is that around, I just have my presentation, sorry, I'm just looking for the statistics, but around the 75% of the adults reported that will be unlikely or really unlikely to consume some of the products with the warning labels once we compared it with the GDA. Let me just explain myself. If we have one product that has the GDA, doesn't say anything, like 80% of sugar, then we have the same product with this warning labeling. The way the Mexican consumer will behave is like, you have the labeling in this product, warning label, you will not consume it, or will be extremely unlikely you will consume it. In comparison to the GDA, that apparently people would not know there is an unhealthy product and might be likely to consume it. So this kind of changes in behavior will lead us in a few years to a certain change to NCDs, to the prevalence of NCDs, changing the behaviors and environments of food environments. I think it's really soon to make these evaluations regarding to NCDs. However, when we go back to the public health objective of the measure, we can say that the policy is working so far.
Thank you so much. And it's interesting that you mentioned just 2 months after you saw a difference. So that's good that there was tracking of the impact. We do have 2 more questions before we shift gears into the other section of our webinar here this evening. And one of the questions that we have from Louise, I think I'm pronouncing that name correctly. Hey, Javier, you can wave hi. Has there been any substantial difference in pricing of goods on the shelves because of new labeling, warning, and your initiatives?
Pricing as the price of the product, is it?
Yes. So have you
Okay.
seen a difference in the pricing of the products because of the labeling stipulations, the warnings that have been placed on the products?
Not at all. They're not being, like, most of the public discourse that the industries and the enterprises use in general is that they're going to rise some prices, they're going to be on unemployment, they're going to be international lawsuits from Nestle or other companies. None of that had happened so far, and we have already like 2 years of the implementation. However, one of the things that happened is that in order to create a more competitive products, the industries reformulated their products, and that's extremely important. So they have companies, especially huge, big companies, have the capacity and the ability to reframe their portfolios, to reframe their products in order not to have a warning label. Why? Because this will be an advantage over other products. So what we have seen is that there has not been any incrementation of the price, but we have seen how the products have changed their composition, changed their formula, and I don't know, products that has 1 or 2 warning labels, now they have just 1 or none. And this has been a huge change, especially for consumers and population in general. They're consuming healthy products, or at least not harmful products, just for the implementation of the warning label.
That's incredible. So we not only think about the large organizations, but also the local businesses as well. So I'm happy to hear that on both fronts, there was no significant change to the pricing. Now, I think our last question before we shift gears that all of us were thinking is, this is a beautiful question that came from Shira. How is the SSB tax revenue collected in Mexico? How is it being used? And is it being used to further alleviate NCDs or public health concerns? I think this is the big elephant. How are
Hi.
Oh, sorry, we've lost Dentricia for a little bit because we have some rain over here in St. Kitts and Nevis right now. But the question was, how is the SSB tax revenue collected in Mexico being used? Is it being used to further alleviate NCDs and public health concerns? So really, how is the tax revenue being used? And Dentricia is back.
Oh, hi. Thank you. I was hoping it wasn't me. So thank you so much. So yeah, well, unfortunately, this has to do more the tax system, Mexican system, rather than the tax itself. The way the taxes works in Mexico is that they go to a huge bag, and then the states decide how to use them, how to spend the money. However, one of the important things that we notice is that the taxes arrive to this huge bag, and then the state, the government, make a list of how they're going to spend it. And we identified that a considerable amount of these taxes, well, in general, the taxes, were used in order to create water fountains and public water beverages in schools and public spaces. So we can infer that some of these taxes were used for the purpose that we wanted. Was we can say a battle that we won. We cannot affirm it because the way the taxes work in Mexico. However, the estimations says that yeah, we can assume there is a link between the taxes, the incomes that the government has, and the way they spend it.
Thank you so much for that. I'm hoping can you see me and hear me? Excellent. I do want to, I'm hoping it's saying that my internet is unstable. I apologize, but Javier, just really great insights. Thank you so much for the questions. We're going to shift gear and know that we still have Javier online. So if you have questions, you can ask it in the box and we'll elevate them and address it to him accordingly. I do want to, again, thank you, Javier. I do want to shift gears and welcome Abby. Abby is the Director of Program Management here at Lake Health and Wellbeing. And Abby will really lead the conversation with our panelists about the question, what does that mean? We've heard what has happened in Mexico, but what does that mean for our other islands, and where do lawyers come in? And so we're happy to have Abby with us take over from here. And again, utilize the Q&A box. We love the feedback and we want to continue receiving your feedback. Over to you, Abby.
Wonderful. Can you hear me? Okay, great. So thank you so much, Javier, for your presentation and for really outlining how Mexico has used the law to try and combat NCDs. And thank you so much, Dentricia, for facilitating so well. So I'd like to invite the panelists to turn on their videos and their mics so that we can get started. So really, it's such a pleasure for me to facilitate this panel discussion. And hopefully we're going to delve into the topic of the effectiveness of the law in tackling NCDs across the region and also exploring Mexico again. So we have a very experienced panel with significant expertise in public health and public health law, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to them. So first, I'm going to go in sort of alphabetical order. So first we have Kesaundra Alves, who is an attorney at law with a Master's of Law degree in health law, ethics, and policy. Kesaundra has significant training and work experience related to public health law in areas such as HIV, sexual and reproductive health, tobacco control, and food policy. She's currently the Caribbean legal consultant for the food policy program at the Global Health Advocacy Incubator. Next, we have Juan Carballo, who coordinates technical legal assistance at all stages of the Global Health Advocacy Incubator's advocacy campaigns for their food and nutrition portfolio, from providing strategic guidance on policy development and drafting laws and regulations to advising litigation strategies and supporting legal capacity building efforts. For 7 years, Juan was a member of the International Legal Consortium, the global legal unit at the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids for tobacco control-related matters. Prior to joining the Global Health Advocacy Incubator and the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, Juan worked at the O'Neill Institute at Georgetown University Law Center, where he also completed his Master's of Law. He has extensive work experience in civil society organizations and has written papers and book chapters on constitutional law, environmental law, right to health, and human rights. Also on the panel, we have Maisha Hutton, who's the Executive Director of the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, which is the only regional alliance of NCD-focused civil society organizations since 2012. Prior to joining the HCC, Maisha worked in HIV/AIDS STI prevention for over a decade. And at the HCC, Maisha is responsible for the daily operations, providing strategic oversight and management across all areas. Maisha also serves as a member on the NCD Child Governing Council and the World Cancer Research Fund Policy Advisory Group. And finally, of course, we have Javier, who we just heard from. So welcome to all our panelists. It's a pleasure to have you all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by asking all the panelists a very simple and the same sort of introductory question. So first of all, Kesaundra, so could you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing concerning public health law and NCDs across the Caribbean?
So good evening to my fellow legal counsel and persons working in the public health space across the Caribbean. So I'm Kesaundra. I'm based in Guyana. I am a legal consultant in the food policy program at the Global Health Advocacy Incubator in DC. So I work with partners in the Caribbean like Maisha and Abby, and HCC and Lake Health and Wellbeing, to advocate for laws and policies that support access to healthy and nutritious food for children and adults across the Caribbean. And we push for policies like Javier talked a lot about, front of package warning labels on food. So you'll hear a lot about FOPL or PWL. And we push for laws that restrict the marketing of unhealthy foods to children, because children are very susceptible to marketing and they form eating habits and preferences very early in life. So we really need laws that restrict the marketing of these unhealthy foods to children. We also push for healthy school food environments because that's one of the places where children spend most of their time and where they have access to food. So we want the choices to be healthy ones. And we also push for taxes on sugar-sweetened beverages, as Javi spoke about also. And we also work to prevent the food and beverage industry from interfering in public health policies. So those are some of the issues that the work I do with the region centers around.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kesaundra. So very, very comprehensive work that's been that you're undergoing in terms of trying to tackle a range of public health issues through policy and regulation. So I'd also like to ask Juan a very similar question. So could you tell us a bit about yourself and the work that you've been doing concerning public health law and NCDs, particularly across Latin America?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be part of this event and to hear from you all. And I think I'll be very brief because I think my bio was a little bit long. I was a little bit ashamed while you were reading. So, I mean, just to say that I've been working on these issues. I mean, I've worked for tobacco control matters for almost 10 years, and I've been working on food-related policies for the past 5 years. So most of my experience has been in Latin America, as you mentioned. But I wanted to mention that right now I'm the coordinator of the legal work at the Incubator on food and nutrition policies. And we're currently working on more than 30 countries. So it's really a challenge. We're a 6 lawyers team addressing many challenges in many different regions. So I'm very happy to be playing that role in the team and having somebody like Kesaundra in the team, of course. And that's been, I guess, my experience. I had a very short experience at in a governmental office, but was not dealing with these issues, but with environmental issues. But other than that, it's been mostly on the civil society side. So we're happy to be exchanging ideas and experiences. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. We look forward to hearing from you later on in the panel discussion. And now, Maisha. So Maisha, can you tell us about the Healthy Caribbean Coalition and the work that you're doing, particularly around NCDs legislation and policy?
Thank you, and thanks again. I echo the comments of my colleagues. Thank you for inviting us. Just to say that Kesaundra and Javier and Juan have provided excellent technical support to the HCC. So the HCC, or the Healthy Caribbean, and the kind of focus of the work that we do is really around improving the NCD situation in the region. And what does that mean? That means pushing for environments which support behaviors which reduce the incidence of NCDs, or for those living with NCDs, improve the quality of their life. And the easiest way to do that is to modify the environments through laws. And so we advocate heavily for laws which change environments. We've heard about obesogenic environments. We've heard a lot about that from Javier. We live in environments which are NC-genic. Tobacco, heavily marketed, alcohol, heavily marketed, easily available and accessible. And the same can be said for food. And the environments are really not supportive of physical activity. And then we get to mental health. So we are really heavily invested in advocating for policies and legislation which change the environment and make it easier for individuals to engage in the behaviors that we know reduce the incidence of NCDs. And for those individuals with NCDs, really help them to increase access to medication, improve treatment, and improve palliation at end of life.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Maisha. And so just to say to the audience, if you have any questions for the panel, feel free to put them in the Q&A, and then we'll definitely get to those either during the panel discussion, if they're relevant for the particular issue that we're dealing with, or during the Q&A section. So I'm actually going to go back to Maisha, and I'm just going to ask you, so why do you think, I think you've kind of mentioned it already, but why do you think the law is important in tackling NCDs? And are there any examples from Barbados or across the region where the law has had a positive impact on NCDs?
Thanks. I think, the other point that I wanted to mention in terms of the law being important, we live in small island or small developing state settings where resources are very limited. And we don't have the capacity to implement a series of, kind of one-off independent interventions. So the law really allows us to implement these population level interventions, which yield population level changes. And so some of the examples of where we've seen kind of the fruit of these efforts around legal changes are around food policy, and that's modifying school environments. And two examples there would be Trinidad and Tobago in 2017, when they banned the sale of sugar-sweetened beverages in schools. And we've seen significant improvement in the availability of those beverages in schools since then. Also seen in Jamaica, where there were restrictions on the availability of SSBs in schools. SSB taxes, which we know about in Bermuda. Barbados has recently increased their tax from 10 to 20%. And we saw with the tax a reduction in consumption of SSBs or purchases of SSBs and an increase in purchase of water. Physical inactivity. Schools across the region, for the most part, many of them do have mandatory physical activity. Tobacco, we have a commitment through, we're all signatories, and Kesaundra has been working in this region for many, many years around the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And so there have been some successes around smoke-free legislation across the region. We still have a ways to go, but we are doing well, and some countries are moving ahead quite quickly in that area. And then around universal health coverage, development of treatment guidelines to support treatment, harmonized treatment approaches, and a number of other initiatives. I think I'll stop there.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. That's really helpful. Definitely knowing what laws and regulations are being sort of implemented throughout the Caribbean and the impact that they've had, especially those restrictions around marketing to school children and the availability of unhealthy foods in and around schools. And that's really helpful because we have such a huge childhood obesity problem. So that's really great to hear. So I'd like to ask Kesaundra, Juan, and Javier, being that they're lawyers, why do you think, from your point of view, it's important for us to use the law to tackle NCDs? Why is it that important? Let's start with Kesaundra.
So I'd like to piggyback on something that Maisha said. She said we're very small countries. Not only are we very small countries in the Caribbean, but we don't have limitless resources. We don't have all this money to expend on public health. So one of the reasons we need laws, policies are nice, but policies don't carry the weight of sanctions by the court, legal sanctions, And because we don't have a lot of money to spend on limitless public education, we can pass those costs off over to the industry. So when you tell the tobacco industry they have to put graphic health warnings on tobacco products that inform the potential consumer about the dangers of using this product, you pass the cost of educating the public over to the industry. When you put the front of package warning labels on food products, you pass that cost over. I'm not saying it takes away all responsibility from government, but then you have industry being involved in sharing to a great extent the cost involved with trying to fight NCDs. They don't just get to take profits and then government is saddled with the burden of trying to get people not to smoke or to make healthy food choices. So it's cost effective to have laws. Also, like I said, policies are nice, but policies don't activate the enforcement powers of our customs, who can say, okay, this product does not meet packaging and labeling requirements. It cannot come into our country. It doesn't it doesn't activate the powers of our police force to say, no, you can't smoke in this particular place. You are going to be taken before the court and fined. So we need laws. We need the force of the law to ensure that we can regulate individuals, regulate corporations, and regulate these unhealthy products that we're talking about. We also need the force of the law to protect people from the consequences of the unhealthy choices of others. So you know about the dangers of secondhand smoke, for instance. So you need a law to be able to say that, okay, you can smoke, but you can only smoke in a way or in a place that doesn't affect the right to health of people around you, right? So we definitely need laws and the force of the law to regulate people's behaviors, to regulate unhealthy products, and to hold corporations accountable for violating the human rights, the right to health of the citizens in the region.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Kesaundra. And Juan and Javier, do you have anything to add to that about why it's important for us to use the law to really try and manage and prevent non-communicable diseases? So maybe Javier, do you want anything to add?
I can add something, but maybe Juan, because I already talk a lot.
Okay, so Juan.
To hear Juan. Yeah.
Okay, Juan, would you like to add anything?
Thank you, Javi. I fully agree with what Maisha and Kesaundra mentioned before. I really like the idea that law can contribute to the shaping of a healthier environment for everyone. In line with what Kesaundra was mentioning, I think that there are some changes that are very unlikely to happen unless there are legal measures associated with them. In areas in which there's strong commercial interests opposing some of these best practices or recommended measures, I think having the law on our side and using the law also to advance these issues, I think it's very, very important. I think also it's important because in many occasions lawyers come when things have taken place and they need to make redress a situation, for instance. And I think that by working on this, of course, there are many things that could happen after some of these changes have happened. But I think that emphasizing the importance of the preventive role of the law as well and legal measures to address these problems, I think that's very important. And it's not the primary way in which I think we lawyers tend to think. And I think that's also important. But of course, just mentioning, I think this is obvious, but not because of that, I'm leaving that aside. It's not that it's about the law. I mean, this might be a setting in which we focus on that, but I think we've learned a lot that we need to have a very strong multidisciplinary approach and making sure that all the elements and the experiences from and the evidence from other areas are properly taken into account in the way in which we develop legal measures. I think, of course, there's a lot for the legal work, but I think we need to make sure that the way in which we work is in line with all the developments, experiences, knowledge from other areas. So I also wanted to express that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Javier, if you wanted to add anything around why it is important for us to use the law around public health matters, then feel free.
I do agree completely with my colleagues. And just a little thing, really briefly, is that also the use of the law will lead us to recognition of some rights for the people and human rights for the people, right to health, right to food, right to information for consumers. So these issues and the way they're like recognized, doesn't matter if it's through the law or through the precedents on the courts, I think they are important, no? Important for us as people in general, and important for the legal framework of our jurisdictions of our country.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So now I'm gonna just ask Maisha a question about, so the types of laws that you would like to see Caribbean governments introduce to tackle NCDs. I think you've sort of mentioned some of the ones that have been working well, but what are the types of laws that you would like to see Caribbean governments focus on to tackle NCDs?
Thanks. I think in order to answer the question, I wanted to just touch on kind of a concept of commercial determinants of health, which I'm not sure whether or not the audience is familiar with. And when we think about NCDs and we think about the primary risk factors, tobacco use, alcohol, unhealthy diets, and physical inactivity, in particular, the first three, we think about, what are the determinants? What's the primary factor that leads to these issues? And they really are what we call these commercial determinants of health. So private sector actions that result in either positive or negative health. And so there's a need to regulate those activities. And so when we think about the primary, what HCC wants to see in the region, it's a regulation of those commercial actors and the results of the commercial activity. So when we think about unhealthy diets, one of the main laws that we're trying to push for now, and it was so lovely to see Javier's presentation, is front of package warning labeling in the region. And I'm glad Javier went through the very kind of important reasons why the octagonal warning label is the most effective label. Currently in the region, there's a kind of a tug between the octagonal warning label and other labels, but it's really important that we as a region move forward with this standard, which will then allow at the national level domestic regulation. So front of package warning label is a foundational enabling policy which will identify those foods, the kind of package of foods which need to be regulated very easily. These are the foods which should be taxed. These are the foods which should be regulated in school settings. I think that's a really key one that we need to move forward with. And then secondly, around that is the school policies. And we're looking at many of the school policies that have been implemented in the region and learning. And one of the challenges they're coming out with repeatedly is they're having a difficulty identifying which foods they need to regulate in school settings. Having the labels like we see in Mexico and like we see in Chile allows the schools and administrators to easily identify again. I mean, I think it's worth mentioning over and over again. It allows them to easily identify these foods that do not belong in the school setting, that cannot be marketed in school settings. So that's another critical one. And then with tobacco, just kind of ongoing pushing with fulfillment of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. The Caribbean committed to be smoke-free by 2022, and we've got just 2 months left to achieve that goal. So I think we need to really amp up and accelerate action there. And alcohol policies, the WHO has just approved the Global Alcohol Action Plan. And I think for young people in particular, we need to move ahead with policies around alcohol. So that's kind of, those are the focus areas for us right now.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. So that's front of package warning labels, school policies, tobacco control, and alcohol policies. So that's really clear. And so Kesaundra, I guess, because you've been working all across the region as a lawyer. So are these the types of policies that you've been working on? And sort of what is going on across the Caribbean legally with some of these policies?
Yes, so I would say that we've definitely made more headway in relation to tobacco control than we have with laws that regulate food. So in CARICOM, there's 7 countries that actually have 100% smoke-free indoor public spaces. So Antigua, Barbuda, Barbados, Guyana, Jamaica, St. Lucia, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago. And these 7 countries also have very strong graphic health warnings on tobacco products. And in Guyana and Jamaica, for instance, it's 60% of the tobacco products package has to have this graphic health warning that is provided by the Ministries of Health in the Ministry of Health in the respective countries to the distributor or the person who's selling the tobacco product. We also have countries that have a complete ban on tobacco advertising, promotion, and sponsorship. So Antigua, Guyana, and Suriname, no tobacco advertising is allowed. I must say in all of these countries, and in some of these respects, there are issues with implementation. And another issue that we have is an issue with monitoring and evaluation, and collection of statistics to see how things are working. So it was nice to see that in Mexico, when Javier was giving his presentation, that they're actually collecting data to show how these laws have been working. So we do have some work to do with the Caribbean, but in terms of, these are victories, I want to think that we actually have these laws. In some countries like Guyana, it took a decade for us to actually get to the point of having laws for tobacco control. So we're pushing. So Barbados is leading the way in the Caribbean in terms of taxes on sugar sweetened beverages, SSBs. And as Maisha explained earlier, they have a 20% ad valorem tax on sugar sweetened beverages, which is exactly what is recommended by the World Health Organization, to make these beverages less affordable and to especially keep it out of the hands of children. Children have unlimited pocket change to spend every day. So if you make the beverages more expensive, they're less likely to purchase a sugar sweetened beverage. Those are some of the victories that we've had. We've had some policy victories, not law, but policy. So the school nutrition policy in Jamaica, the school nutrition policy in Barbados, the one in Barbados is about to be rolled out. Jamaica, hopefully soon. So there are some victories in the policy space, but those are the ones that we're proud of in relation to law.
Wonderful. So at least progress is being made. So that's encouraging. That's definitely encouraging. And so I'll move on to Javier. So this is what the Caribbean has been doing. So could you tell us a little bit about what's happening with our brothers and sisters in Latin America? So what sort of work is going on in Latin America? I know Javier has already mentioned front of package warning labels, sugar sweetened beverage tax, but is there anything else that's going on in Latin America that we could potentially learn from?
For Latin America, yeah, I will
Sorry, maybe that's a bit broad, but
Juan.
yeah,
Juan,
but
I
maybe
think he has
go
like
ahead.
the picture. I can talk a little bit about Mexico because we have been following up also like schools regulation policies. I think one of the things we always try to do in El Poder is that labelings are important, taxes are important. We have to see this as a whole kind of package of policies. Yeah. At the end, we will have also other issues that are rising. We were presenting some weeks before some other colleagues of the region. For example, the labeling positioning or social corporate responsibility. This kind of advertisings are the ones that the industries now are using, and we can have experiences like from tobacco, the way the companies, the tobacco industry behave before, once their market was target, is the same behavior that now the food industries are using. So just really brief, we are trying to give this understandable how can I say this? We are trying to tackle all these issues in all these arenas, and inevitable we'll have these little issues that will come after, just like the ones that were mentioned. So yeah, I think Juan is the best person to talk about Latin America.
Sorry, go ahead, Juan.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I can provide a kind of a very broad response, and I think I'll be linking with some of the things that also Javi mentioned in his initial presentation. And of course, but we would be happy to ask questions or anything related to specific countries. It's not that we know for every single country and everything, but I mean, both of us, I mean, Javi as well, we've been working for quite some time in this area. I'm sorry. So I think in general terms in tobacco, if I can say, I know that Latin America in general, in particular South America, I'm sorry, Javi, for that, but I think I know that, for instance, PAHO celebrated that. I think there was kind of achievement in which the whole region became smoke-free environments, and that was kind of a milestone. And I think it's clear that over the past few years, and even before that, there have been strong laws and regulation that had been approved for tobacco control. And whenever we from the region joined different global gatherings and so on, we saw that some of the progress in Latin America was seen like in really good eyes from other countries. And I think that for food policies, I think we have started to see the same. And also Maisha mentioned this in one of her comments, Javier as well. I think we've seen in a few different countries in the region, like Chile, Mexico, even initially, if now the system is not probably what we would recommend, like Ecuador was one of the first countries to advance on food policies, on labeling restrictions. Peru, Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil. So we've seen progress, and some of those progress kind of with stronger protection mechanisms to advance food-related goals from these policies. So some of the things that I think are behind this include the fact that in general terms, we've been connecting some of these policy requests and the demand for changes with international human rights obligations. And we've used for tobacco control, for food policies over the past few years quite strongly. And also from a more kind of lawyer's perspective, whenever we had the chance to discuss this before the courts, we've also used constitutional protection mechanisms, either to respond to some of the strategy from the industry or either to push government to advance, which we have many examples in the region for different policies, both mostly for tobacco, but also for food policies. Yeah, I think that's some of the things in which the region has been working. And I think that related to this, I think besides some of the numbers of approval and in particular, it's easier for tobacco when we had some standard related to the FCTC. I think there are strong challenges in the region. So I'm not just here saying that we have done everything and that's it. So we have a really, just like as it was said before, a really strong challenge with regards to implementation. In Latin America, we're big fans of approving really beautiful texts, but then making them a reality becomes really a tough challenge for us. I mean, going to more kind of specific type of challenges, the digital environment has been a challenge, both, for instance, for tobacco and food, which are the areas that I'm more related to. It's been really difficult, even for tobacco, when we have strong restrictions and even strong support for those restrictions. It's been really challenging to make them enforceable in the digital environment. And I think in some occasions, some of the challenges include that we're perhaps pushing so hard that we lose sight of some of the other legal risks associated when we are really pushing for strong and stronger measures. So I think just to respond to the questions in a broader way, but as I said, I'd be happy to talk about any of the countries in the region.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. And as you sort of ended with challenges, then maybe I'll go to Kesaundra just to talk through maybe some of the challenges that you're encountering and other lawyers around the region are encountering in terms of implementing laws and regulations around public health.
Yeah, so in relation to tobacco control, for example, we have systems and processes that have the private sector involvement built in. So for countries that want to pass standards in relation to packaging and labeling or whatever other issue, they have to, if they're going to work with the Bureau of Standards, then there are sometimes laws in those countries in the Caribbean that allow private sector representative, to sit on whatever committee is making these decisions. I don't think when laws were being passed that public health was in mind at the time. So in instances now we find the public health interests and the interest of private sector run counter to each other. So it's not a good idea to have private sector involved in making public health related decisions. So one problem is having them built into public health processes in the Caribbean. The other one is the overt and covert industry interference in public policy making. So in Guyana, for example, when we were about to debate the tobacco control bill in Parliament, we had the tobacco industry send letters to all our parliamentarians, packages to all our parliamentarians with arguments and against the tobacco control legislation and scare tactics, or you're going to lose taxes and, you know, and those kinds of things. So clearly interfering. And then when they realized that we were working on tobacco control legislation, you know, they started funding, giving money to let's say the Ministry of Social Protection to hold parties for senior citizens, or to youth groups for sporting events, and all of these would be in the media, you know, painting the tobacco industry in a positive light. So they were basically abusing, I call it, corporate social responsibility. So they were actively interfering, you know, targeting our ministers, targeting our parliamentarians, and also building up this positive image and using their vast resources, you know, to combat our public health efforts. So, and then we also had issues in some countries with conflict of interest among public officials. You know, so you would find key officials in high positions who are part of decision making for public health, who also have private sector interests that would run counter to what we were trying to do. So that's also a big issue. And I would say maybe one more is the industry constantly flooding the media with their narrative and using scare tactics, like I said, in relation to loss of taxes, but not telling the public how much money is really expended on public health. Like in Guyana, public health care is free. You know, it's free of charge, it's not free of charge. So they don't tell you how much is being spent versus how much money we're getting from tobacco taxes, but they're scaring public officials and scaring the public into, you know, not being in favor of tobacco control. So those are some of the issues that we encountered and continue to encounter in the region.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. That's really insightful. Like, so there's industry interference, conflict of interest, and industry constantly flooding the market with their messaging. And so I think we'll probably come back to industry interference. I actually just want to go over to Maisha just to ask her about some of the biggest challenges that you've encountered when advocating for policies and regulations to address NCDs, and maybe how you try to sort of overcome some of those challenges.
Thank you. So I'm echoing all of the comments by our colleagues, and I have such a long list here of our challenges. I mean, competing political priorities leading to policy inertia coming out of COVID, weak civil society capacity. I think we've seen really super advocacy work in those civil society organizations where we've had external investments, which have allowed us to build our capacity and do the type of work that you see Lake Health and Wellbeing doing. And in addition to weak civil society capacity, weak legal capacity. I mean, let's be frank, I think about the FOPL work that we've been doing. And we had, before Kesaundra came along, we had one lawyer that we had to get on repeat across the islands, participating in the FOPL debates to field counter arguments with industry. Regional evidence, you know, that's something that continues to be a challenge for us, having regional evidence. And that also includes, when we talk about evidence and kind of intellectual input, I'm thinking about also legal scholarship. So we just had a wonderful piece written by Nicole Foster and two other lawyers. It was public health protection versus freedom of commercial expression in the Commonwealth Caribbean, the case of Barbados and Jamaica. So this type of scholarship is really, really important. And then piggybacking on what Kesaundra said, you know, we've enshrined in our regional procedures and processes this idea of multisectorality, but we don't have, as part of that process, the necessary safeguards to protect against conflict of interest and undue influence. And we need to start thinking about, yes, while we strengthen multisectorality, which we know we need to ensure that we're also protecting policymaking from external interests. And then I also have around here empowerment of people living with NCDs and youth, connecting related agendas, such as climate change, food security, and that goes back to our resource limitations. And finally, I think like the biggest one is weak public health governance. And that speaks again to echoing what Kesaundra has said. And we've seen that played out with front of package warning labeling, really leading to issues around transparency, accountability. We need access to information legislation so that we can have direct intelligence on what's happening behind closed doors. And the lack of this, this weak public health governance, it really opens the door to industry interference. And there is a significant power asymmetry that we as civil society just cannot counter. Private sector has access at the highest levels to decision makers. Without the conflict of interest legislation, access to information, we don't know what the narrative being pushed is. So I think those are some of the major issues that we are faced with. And in terms of countering them, we've been working with lawyers like Kesaundra to work on pushing conflict of interest policies, developing those tools, working with the public sector to sensitize them, working with legal scholars and legal individuals. We have established the Caribbean Public Health Law Forum, which is really meant to foster that type of learning and capacity building. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. That is really helpful. So time is a little bit against us. So what I probably am going to do is just very quickly jump into the Q&A to get some questions from the audience before I come back and ask a couple more questions. So one question that has come up for Kesaundra is that you said we should push for change. Who do you push, and how do you find government attitudes towards change and your valuable work?
So I think the question relates to how is the Global Health Advocacy Incubator pushing for change? Mm-hmm. What we do is support the civil society organizations in the region, like HCC and like Lake Health and Wellbeing, to advocate for the changes that they want to see in order to improve the NCD situation in the region. So what we do is support the organizations in the Caribbean. And what was the second part?
How do you find government attitudes towards change and your work and your valuable work?
It's a little difficult, because when you talk about seeing the impact in relation to public health, when you have laws that reduce the number of smokers or make people make healthier food choices, they may not see those results tomorrow, but they see their tax dollars tomorrow, if you know what I mean. So it's hard to get them to see the long-term benefits of what it is that we're fighting for, because they want to be able to say, oh, we brought in this amount of money, but on the back end, how much are you losing in terms of human lives lost, families that lose a breadwinner prematurely, and then the cycle of poverty continues, the cost of public health care, those things don't make it to the forefront. So it's a fight to get them to make the better long-term decision in the interest of all our human rights, So that is a particular challenge, but you really have to stay grounded in human rights. It is hard for politicians to shrug their shoulders at human rights, at least in public. So you keep focusing on pushing that right to life, that right to health, the right to food, checking your constitution. A lot of constitutions have a right to life built in, and keeping arguments grounded in those rights. It's very hard for politicians to forevermore shrug their shoulders at that. So you have to keep on that. And of course, constantly debunking all the lies and the scare tactics by the industry. And one thing that Maisha mentioned, galvanizing civil society as a whole to fight for human rights. Those are some of the things, engaging the media, being active in the media, and giving public health a voice is also very important.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Kesaundra. So we have a question that's come in, which is, what more can be done to influence the implementation of the necessary laws to buttress the policies? How can we overcome issues such as lack of political will? So I don't know if anybody wants to take that one. Maybe Juan.
I can try to respond. I mean,
okay.
it is very difficult, and I think it's very much connected with what Kesaundra was sharing too. I think from a legal perspective, I mean, and in line with what I was saying, that this is not something solely legal, I think that to actually try to influence political will, there needs to be kind of a more support from society in general, strong presence in the public agenda, so in the media as well, and of course then getting people to buy into what you're proposing, and showing to the politicians that what they are risking, if they are not, then they don't advance on this. I think that, of course, legal measures can play a role in that. I think that, for instance, and there are many different ways in which you can practically do that. For instance, you can, for instance, try to make the arguments and present to some of the committees from the human rights reports that these issues need to be addressed by the government, because otherwise they would be violating their human rights obligations. That I know that it's a strategy that's been under exploration, and then there needs to be a lot of work around that, like a lot of communications work around that. In a few situations in Latin America and in countries in which the procedural rules allow for that, when all these efforts were not effective in trying to influence the public, the political will, we have reached out to tribunals to actually use them to mandate governments to advance or to consider a certain policy, or to advance in a policy with certain minimum requirements, with, of course, various degrees of success. There are a few strong and good successful stories, but I think that's kind of a last resource. In general terms, most NGOs in the regions first try to do more political and communications type of advocacy, but of course there's a role to play for the legal resources in general for communications and political advocacy, but also as a last resource, as another mechanisms to try to put more pressure and to try to influence that political will.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. So the questions are coming in thick and fast. So this one is for Juan. So can you share on the legal risks you mentioned as a result of possibly pushing too hard legally? Was that you,
Sure,
or was that
thank you.
Javier? Okay. Yeah.
Yes, that was me.
Okay.
So I think, and I know this has happened, for instance, in a few countries. I mean, I can provide a few different examples, some from Latin America, some from other regions. I know that in a few occasions, some of the draft policy proposals that we've seen for tobacco, for smoke-free environments, for infringements to those regulations, in particular in a few countries in Africa, were really, really strong, including prison-related sanctions for smokers. So that's clearly a situation in which, by pushing for our agendas, we're also at the same time going too far and potentially opening opportunities for legal risks associated with other freedoms and others. So just using criminal procedures for this type of behaviors might not be the best way to go. Other examples, and I think we've had this discussion, is, for instance, I think for tobacco, no, I mean, it's kind of a fact, but for tobacco, we had really, really strong presence in Latin America from higher tribunals ratifying strong restrictions against tobacco advertisements. So I think that's quite protected. But when we've been discussing similar type of restriction for instance, ultra-processed products, we've faced, even from organizations that we trust, we've faced some resistance, saying this might be too much and might be beyond the level of protection that freedom of expression, of commercial expression in this case, is guaranteed in a certain country. So those are some of the examples that I can say just quickly. So I think also because of this, but not only because of this, I think the fact that we can connect some of these measures with the international human rights obligation needs to be complemented with the fact that we need to work with human rights communities. Because, for instance, another area in which we have not advanced enough, but I think similar risks might be coming up, is the digital environment. by pushing for instance, content regulation related to food advertisement or even tobacco advertisement, when that's at a more an individual level, even if you can make the case that there's an industry behind that. So when those cases are not so clearly, and even from the outside, an industry strategy, but perhaps a simple expression of an individual in their personal networks, might be too much. And if you push for that, then you might be opening the door for other type of restrictions to individual expressions in the digital environment. So, and there's very strong movements and very sophisticated developments from a legal perspective on how to regulate, how to engage with the big tech companies, and how to try to keep that space as safe as possible. So I think whenever we're kind of going to new places, we need to make contacts with those that are experts in those areas and that have been supporting public interest work in that area for a longer period than us. I mean, in particular in that area. So just to provide some examples of what I was referring to with those potential legal risks. Thank you for the question.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So another question is, how do we get legislation pushed by the very people with the conflicts of interest, the very people the legislation is to target? So I don't know, Kesaundra, do you want to take that one?
Like I was saying before, I think it's very hard for politicians to permanently have this posture of shrugging their shoulders at human rights. So this is where our bar associations, our medical associations, along with civil society organizations, all need to keep the pressure going. You know, if there's enough pressure, then the politician cannot ignore. You know, this helps to drum up political will. You know, if we get them to see that public health matters, if we're the voices, then perhaps you can see the change at the top levels. And so in the Guyana experience, I think what helped too with drumming up this political will is having pressure come down from PAHO, our UN partners, you know, and we didn't have a very strong civil society, just our consumer association and our, I think it was a chess association. So, you know, not too much civil society activism, but just partnering with the international organizations to push, to drum up the pressure, you know, helped a lot.
Okay, wonderful.
This is where you come in, bar association.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Maisha, I think Maisha has a hand up. Go ahead, Maisha.
I just wanted to add to what Kesaundra said about building public support. I think on the one hand, and we need to keep going back to kind of the human rights lens and reinforcing with policymakers that these are human rights issues. Also the conflict of interest that these entities have they can be around in consultations, but they can't be at the policymaking table. And that there's an obligation for states to protect the right to health and food. But I think importantly too, and this is really tied to Kesaundra's comment, is we really need to build public support, awareness and support for this idea that industry does not belong in the policymaking space. And we're currently rerunning a regional campaign called Make It Make Sense, where we ask the public, you know, does it really make sense that entities that sell ultra-processed foods, for example, are funding kids' sports days, or they're donating to hospitals, or they are in the consultation room deciding on policies which will directly affect their bottom line? So we're really trying to, in tandem with working with policymakers and increasing that sensitivity and awareness, also getting the public to, you know, creating demand in the public for greater transparency and accountability.
Wonderful, thank you. And Juan, I think you have your hand up as well.
Yes, very quickly, because I think that was a great question. I think Kes and Maisha addressed it really greatly. But just to add, because I think it's interesting what some of our partners in Colombia did. So in response of that question, how do you manage to get politicians that have conflict of interest to actually advance on these issues? You don't. You just basically try to, as Maisha was saying, if possible, either decrease their voice, decrease their influence, or at the end of the day, perhaps even take them out of the decision-making process. So in Colombia, what some of our partners did, led by Cajar, they presented unconstitutionality claim against a regulation that actually weakened the definition of conflict of interest. So basically, reducing what conflict of interest meant for Congress people to be to need to be kind of outside of certain discussions. And because of this constitutional claim that was actually confirmed by the Colombian Constitutional Court, those politicians that received funding from companies needed to exclude themselves from discussions in the areas from the companies that supported their campaigns, which makes a lot of sense, to be honest, but it was not the case. And then the challenged legislation in Colombia opened the door to say only where there was a direct benefit to the person itself, so not to the campaign, but to the person itself, which is really difficult to prove, they needed to exclude themselves. So because of this challenge, and I think it was a really interesting experience, because it was a partnership of, well, this organization that has a lot of experience working on food policy and industry interference, but with an academic with a lot of experience in transparency and electoral rules. So they came with really, really strong answers and with a high visibility, and they got a really, really strong ruling. And I think that's another way to do that. So just making sure that those that are conflicted do not have so much power. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Juan. So we're winding down now. So what I would like to do is ask Maisha, one thing I love about the Healthy Caribbean Coalition is that you produce a lot of really practical, useful tools, resources, information. And one such tool or resource that you have is model legislation. So I wondered if you could speak a little bit about that.
Sure. We recognize that one of the issues with, with our capacity limitations is, drafting capacity. So we worked with partners, and it was actually led by a young person. I think that's important because one of the key issues that I overlooked is really engaging these populations, people living with NCDs and youth. And a young lawyer worked with a senior lawyer, and she put together this model legislation, and we did it in consultation with PAHO and UNICEF and CARFA, like major regional organizations, CARICOM as well. So then in the end, we have a document that we believe that the region feels like they co-own. And the aim is really to use it to support countries in advancing school policies, regulating the sale and availability of ultra-processed foods in schools, so that ultimately CARICOM has, as best possible, a harmonized approach to this type of regulation. And it also contains an M&E component. I wanted to just plug two other publications that we have in the pipeline. One is the Conflict of Interest Primer, and it's for public sector actors, really sensitizing them to the key issues of conflict of interest. And it's really aimed at non-health actors. And the second one is looking at human rights and equity in NCD programming in the region, so that we can start to, again, build that capacity within the non-health sector to see NCD prevention in particular through this lens of human rights and equity.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And then Kesaundra, I wondered if you could just say a couple of words about the Caribbean Public Health Forum.
Yes, so PAHO started this Caribbean Public Health Law Forum that basically brings together lawyers and advocates in the public health space, including public servants working in public health, to advocate for laws to fight NCDs in the region. So it would be very useful if all of you who are interested in public health, who are actually attending right now, would consider joining the Caribbean Public Health Law Forum. I'll put a link in the chat just now. But so basically what the forum does is it brings together the advocates. So it provides support, it also provides resources, tools, training, fact sheets, whatever you might need to help to push for the policy priorities in relation to, right now, the two policy priorities are tobacco control and food policy. So there are two working groups, one for tobacco control and one for food policy. So yeah, that's in a nutshell, that's what the Caribbean Public Health Law Forum is doing. And it's not just for lawyers, just reiterating that. So our doctors, our nurses, our public servants are all welcome to join.
Okay, wonderful. So does anybody have any final questions? So any final questions? Whilst we look at any final questions from the audience, I'm just going to ask each of the panelists really just to give some final thoughts around, and particularly around any tips or advice that you would give lawyers, the Bar Association, public health officials in St. Kitts and Nevis around public health policy and NCDs, particularly we're working, the focus I think right now for the Ministry of Health in terms of policy is tobacco control and sugar sweetened beverages. So if you all have any tips, advice, guidance that you'd prepare to share for lawyers, the Bar Association, public health officials, that would be wonderful. And we could start with Juan. Start with Juan.
Sure, thank you very much. I think that there could be many recommendations specific for each one of the policies, but I think we cover many of the issues that I think we wanted to highlight. I think in general terms, and more, I guess, from the perspective of the Bar Association, I think making sure that they continue to play an active role in spreading the relevance of the legal work around these issues. I think that's of key importance, like events like this one, and I think this is still valuable. I think that in that sense, engaging students, not only lawyers, but also students, young lawyers, and showing that there's really a lot to be done in the legal work around these issues. I think that's also important. I know that in many occasions, and I think this was, Maisha also mentioned this, I mean, there's a lot of needs there's a lot of needs for legal work, and sometimes it's difficult to find those that understand the issues and have the bandwidth to work and so on. But there's really a lot of work to be done. And I mean, for young lawyers, it's an interesting field to explore, I think. In general terms, I think, and also connected to what we've mentioned and talking about, we also linking with Javier's comments, and I think the experience of connecting these issues with human rights obligations, human rights movements, communities, has been really good and has worked for most Latin American countries, so that could be an issue. And I think also Maisha was mentioning the importance of, also in relation to the publication that she was mentioning, of not only focusing on health authorities. I think that's been really important. I mean, for tobacco, but also for food, I think it's such a complex issue, and we cannot focus only on health authorities, because then we'll find so many other obstacles coming from other places. And I think legal resources do have some role to play in that regard, but as I mentioned also before, we need to for sure work with other areas of expertise. I mean, that's been really important, and for me personally, has been a very joyful experience learning from many others. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. So Javier, over to you. The final thoughts and tips and advice.
Thank you. Well, just final thoughts, as Juan was saying, I think it's always important to share experience. We have learned from like many other experience from even other topics like tobacco control. And I think one of the most important things to do as lawyers, as civil society, as actors, is just to share, because at some point, the common background is the industry, the arguments of the industries, the opposition, the conflict of interest, and it's likely that there is a good experience elsewhere. Some people might have faced already this argument, has response these other arguments. So if we can share, and we can also, as El Poder, we can support your work and help with the things we have, we will be really happy to do it. So, and yeah, that will be my final thought. Anything you need from there, from him especially, you're more than welcome. And I was really glad to participate in this webinar. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. And then over to Kesaundra for final words, tips, advice.
Sure. So again, I'll ask everyone to join the Caribbean Public Health Law Forum, and to also say that the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus, they have a health research unit that they develop and roll out a number of public health related, law related courses. So if you can, when you see the notification for those courses, they're available in groups. If you join the forum, you'll get that information. But if you can take some of those courses on health governance and public health in general, that would be pretty useful. And maybe one final thought is if all of us in here have been privileged to get an education, if I get diabetes and end up losing a leg, I can still sit at my computer and talk to you and type, and but if someone who is not as fortunate as I am, they're a laborer, they do manual labor, for a living, they don't have the education that I have, they lose a leg and they're their family's breadwinner, then that family suffers a great deal. And all the evidence has shown that people who are less fortunate, who don't have the resources that we have, they suffer a lot more when they contract NCDs. So if you're privileged enough to be a lawyer, to be a doctor, to be a nurse, to have a voice, to be part of a bar association, to be able to access the media, to be able to access decision makers, I think we all have a responsibility to those who don't have a voice, like, the poor, the children who don't have a voice and can't say, what is best in their best interest. We have a responsibility to the vulnerable among us to use our voice collectively.
Excellent point. Excellent. And last but definitely not least, Maisha, tips, advice, guidance.
I don't know if I can follow those. I would just like to congratulate the Law Association for engaging in this partnership with Lake Health and Wellbeing. I think if we could replicate this across the region, and then encourage engaging in the Caribbean Public Health Law Forum, we would really, really benefit. I think going back to Kesaundra's last comment, all of this is about people and improving the lives of people living with NCDs, and using the law is really the best way to achieve that population level change and ensure that there's equitable impact. So congratulations to the Law Association. If anyone is interested in working at a regional level, please contact me. Thanks very much for having me.
Great, thank you so much. And I would just like to say thank you to all the panelists. The insight was fantastic. We appreciate your contribution, really, really insightful. So thank you so much, Maisha, Kesaundra, Juan, Javier, thank you so much. So I'm now going to hand over to Adisha Green from the Bar Association, who's going to give a vote of thanks. And then after that, it will be Dentricia to just wrap up and close for us. So thank you so much for your attention, everyone. And over to you, Ms. Green.
Hello, good evening, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the St. Kitts and Nevis Bar Association, I wish to extend my sincere thanks to the panelists this evening. Thank you, Javier. Thank you, Kesaundra, Maisha, Juan, for presenting such an informative and thought-provoking discussion this evening. I think that each and every one of us present have not only been able to identify the issues, but I feel that we are now better equipped with what tools we can implement, not only for the legal systems regionally and in respective territories, but on each and every one of us in our offices, in whatever sector that we operate in, that we know that there's by some small way in our actions in promoting this discussion that we could advocate for change in this fight, I would call it, to implement solutions to improving the attitude towards public health and the issues that we have faced in this region. I also, of course, would like to express my sincere and deep thanks to the Lake Health and Wellbeing team. Thank you to the moderators, Abby and Denistria. Thank you for guiding such an amazing, dynamic discussion with the panelists this evening. I'm so grateful for the collaborative effort you all have used to get the panelists together all here this evening to really make a change in our attitudes and the way we approach public health issues in the legal sector. So again, I think that each and every one of us has really left here with a baton to pass on and implement some change. And again, the Law Association of St. Kitts and Nevis, we really thank you for putting together this amazing discussion this evening.
We are so grateful for Edisha for that beautiful final thank you. And we also want to thank you, those of you who have stayed with us in this conversation. We are looking forward to continuing this conversation and taking action on what was discussed here. We're also very excited to connect with you to see how we can best partner to make sure that we're tackling NCDs in a smart and efficient and intelligent way. I do want to encourage you before you leave to follow us on all of our socials at Lake Health and Wellbeing. Check out our website, lakehealthandwellbeing.com. Look for more events, look for more campaigns, and feel free to reach out to us. So with that, we want to wish you a good Wednesday night. Have a safe and productive week, and we hope to see you on the next one. Take care and God bless.